Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge, because life just doesn't have to be mediocre. And joining me is someone who is not mediocre at all. In fact, she's funny, bright, intelligent. Oh, I can go on, but then she'll probably hit me on the head. Susan, how are you?
About to hit you on the head.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
I'm
how have you
really
been,
glad
Susan?
to be here. And we have a great guest. So
We
excited
do.
to get right into the program.
Okay, here we go. We're back. Susan, would you like to do the honor of introducing our guest from the far reaches of New York?
Yes, thank you. Our guest today is Dr. Van Hartmann, and he is from Manhattanville College in New York. Welcome, Van. How are you doing today?
Hello. Delighted to be here, and also delighted to be connected with you again after having worked with you a few years back. And everything that Rick said about you is absolutely true.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm totally embarrassed.
Now she's going to hit you, too.
Yeah, I know. So I lost all my hair getting hit over the head.
Well, ready to do that. No, I'm so glad that you're here because it was such a pleasure to work with you when I was working in upstate New York. And I was very impressed with everything that you did in terms of literature and also in terms of creative writing. And I wanted to invite you to be a guest because I thought it would be interesting to talk about new trends in literature and creative writing, and then also about what inspires you to write.
Sure. Okay.
So let's start with the easy one. What do you like about literature?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, what's not to like about literature? I suppose for me, well, I'll just give a little background. I started out in college as a pre-med student, studying psychology and taking lab courses in the sciences, all of which was really, really wonderful and interesting, except there came a point where I realized that literature was giving me a more satisfying insight into other human beings and human relationships and deeper emotional, realities of what we are than I was getting in my more formal psychology courses. And there's an essay called "Look into a Microscope," in which the author can only see his own eyelashes. And I had a few experiences like that in the lab where I realized that I really belonged not in a lab looking in a microscope, but looking at the world through the prism of literature and what writers were able to see in other people. And so to me, literature is that chance to look deep inside myself, and through that empathetic process that literature enables us to experience, to look inside other people from the perspective of truly insightful observers of other people. So I know that's a long-winded description of it, but of what it gives to me in terms of studying it and reading it.
Van, that you make a really good point of how you discovered really yourself, or what you had an inclination for through literature. And as you were saying that, I'm thinking, and we don't teach any literature anymore. Elementary school, they don't read books anymore, or they read pretty crummy books. It's like old literature, gone. Everything's gone. And you just go, what happened? Where did we make a wrong turn out into our own oblivion? Because I did a webinar yesterday on storytelling and e-learning. And, my first comment was storytelling and stories and literature are how we transmit knowledge from one generation to the next. not to mention just by having friends, you transmit knowledge. When you talk, when you do a show like this, we're transmitting information.
Absolutely.
Where are we going with all this?
Well, what I find interesting is that one of the things that I was involved in at Manhattanville was, for a number of years, I was on the pre-med committee as a humanities literature person, because it turns out that medical schools, one of my original interests, really want their doctors to be trained in understanding how patients tell stories and how the creation of a narrative transmits, as you say, knowledge, information that might not be available through, just lab tests. So that's one interesting facet. The other thing that, as you point out, that concerns me greatly is that larger cultural narrative that we should be a part of. And frankly, we are a part of it whether we know it or not. And it shapes our perceptions of each other, of ourselves, of the structure of the world that we live in. And if we're not aware of it, it seems to me there are a couple of things that happen. They're sort of diverse, opposite. One is we lose contact with our own identity as human beings, our own cultural identity. The other thing is curiously opposite. We can perpetuate unexamined prejudices, stereotypes, myths, if you will, if we don't bring an understanding of those myths into our lives. And only by reading literature. I also teach film, so I see film as an extension of that. But in particular, reading literature enables us both to connect with who we are culturally as human beings, but also to examine some of those really damaging, terrible stereotypes and prejudices we pass along through our narratives. And I think they're both so crucial to being human, to be able to empathize with fellow human beings, but also to look back across history and see where we've come from.
Well, here's an example, and I love what you're saying. And one thing that comes to mind, over the last 2 years, I've become obsessed with industrial novels of the 19th century. And the reason I became relatively obsessed is I was interested in disruptive technologies and interested in how people dealt with, say, the Industrial Revolution in the past. And so I looked at in 19th century England, the first part, and like Benjamin Disraeli wrote a lot of things, and of course Charles Dickens. And then at the end of the 19th century, there were other disruptions with the car and things. And Booth Tarkington, who's often forgotten now, wrote a lot about that in his trilogy. And that we have the film, The Magnificent Ambersons, is like a second of that. But I resonate with what you're saying, because I was looking at that thinking, wow, they were experiencing the same things that we are with our disruptive technologies.
No, I agree, and I mean, well, if you look at Dickens, you mentioned, you good grief, a novel like Bleak House could be a study of modern legal entanglements that sap people's wealth and immerse them in a bureaucratic system of kinds that we face all the time in modern society. The Industrial Revolution, I mean, it's curious, what I teach in literature goes back to the early 18th century as well, and I teach people like Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope, who expressed, they're often thought of as rationalists, but they expressed incredible reservation, especially Jonathan Swift, about the conversion of traditional values into mathematically quantifiable, definable, fragments, and the potential loss of humanity, of our humanity, in doing that. He has a wickedly delicious essay called A Modest Proposal, in which he has a very, very well-meaning man set out to solve the problems of the Irish by proposing that if they just use a rational system to solve their problems, they would end up taking care of their children better. They would deal with the problems of poverty and disease, and they would have a much better society. Of course, his solution to this is to propose the raising of children to about the age of 2 or 3, and then using them as food. And you get caught up, and you get caught up in the logic, the systems analysis of that essay, until at the end, this great satirist, Swift, springs on you the utter inhumanity of where it's taking you.
Mm-hmm.
And we only have to look at oh my God, Hitler didn't start out to be evil. He started out to do what he thought was good, and just forgot one unfortunate thing, that human beings are human, and that you can't create this perfect world just based on, technology and pure rationalism. And so, and then today we have, of course, our own versions of this, our own versions of people wanting to impose what sound like simple, but turn out to be simplistic solutions to social problems that forget basic, simple things. Other human beings are human beings. Anyway, to take us full circle, this where reading comes in. There, I think, have been a fair number of studies that show that the more students, more young people read, the more they develop empathy for other human beings. And the more they rely just on, Facebook, technology, Twitter, these short little bites of information, rather than the full immersion in the stories of other human beings, the less empathy they develop.
That's a really good point. And it makes so much sense. They've done some studies on the 24-hour news cycle and 24-hour news stations that basically, for the most part, peddle misery. And not to mention disinformation and everything else. But the thing is, it creates a lack of empathy. It creates division, anger, depression. And they said people who watch news day and night usually wind up depressed.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
I've always told people, there is a lot of depressing stuff in the news, and we know everything that happens in the world now, whereas before, we knew our little area of the world. Now we have the whole world on our shoulders, and you can't change the whole world. And people just take every problem on as their own. And the other thing you said, I 100% agree with, and hadn't really thought about that, but when you do read, you're exposed to so much more. And you do develop that empathy, that realization of humanity. I remember, growing up in the 60s, I was pretty much a teenager, late 60s, and and even in the 50s, there were a lot of science fiction movies that always talked about the end of the earth and why we died and how we did this. And then there was Forbidden Planet, which talked about the Krell Empire and how they destroyed themselves because of their id, their mind that was out of control. But all of them kind of came to the point of no empathy. We became technocrats. We became so technical we forgot the human part of it. And I've been reading stuff recently that iPads, cell phones are having the same effect on us as what you're saying. People don't read that much. Now, I like to read digitally. I have bad eyes. So for me, the digital iPad and phone is a good way to read because I can see more contrast. But
sure.
I see people so attached to their phones, and their whole life is a tweet or a message, and you go, wow, I've seen people go to there's 4 people at dinner, and they're all tweeting each other at dinner. They're not talking to each other. They're actually Messaging. You
But
go.
Rick, there's
Yeah.
a reality TV and the
Yeah.
Kardashians. You
That's
feel
true.
you don't think that builds empathy?
Or antipathy.
I don't know what I should or shouldn't say in this interview, but I would argue that some of the current political discussions, shall we call them, are merely a version of that reality TV.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
Promoting
philosophic or
the
calculus.
most simplistic of ugly sound bites.
Well, that's the problem. Everything's a soundbite. You know, we don't get into much anymore, and all thoughts have to be done. And you know, we become Twitter, 140 characters, and you're done. But you can't convey everything in 140 characters. You can have good synthesis, but some things are left out, and like humanity, for one. But what influenced you most when you were studying literature, and film to that point too? Because that's an interesting juxtaposition of the two.
Yes.
What motivated you about literature? What got you enchanted with it that you really started seeing a difference in you and how you look at life?
I think there are probably multiple things. One, of course, is what we were talking about earlier. We're, as human beings, I believe strongly, and I think there's plenty of science or neuroscience and psychology to indicate that we are storytelling creatures, and the immersion in stories, I think at an early age, gave me a couple of things. One, another space to go to.
Yeah.
Another reality to dive into. But it couldn't just be a fantasy reality for me. I needed stories that connected in some way with life, but nonetheless took me out of the current life into some sort of parallel story that then reflected back at me an ability to make sense of my world. And we're all confused as kids and as teenagers, and so literature kind of gave me a chance to look back at myself through somebody else's stories. So that's one thing. The other thing I think was, I don't know why, maybe some people respond to this, some people don't, but maybe this is why I gravitated toward poetry, but just the beauty of language, the rhythms of poems, the wonderful imagery in a novel, the way that a character is captured in a paragraph. Again, going back to Dickens, he's a master, obviously, of capturing through incredible language the most significant features of different human types. So anyway, so language too. I mean, I don't know why I was pulled to that, but when I hear, when I read someone like Yeats or someone like Keats, or someone like Mark Doty, to talk about a more modern author, there's beauty in just the movement of the words and the clarity of the images that also is part of what drew me to literature, I suppose.
It's painting with words.
Yeah.
And it creates.
My father was an engineer, but he was also a wood carver, and I think for me that parallel between painting and words, between visual art and words, has always been deep within me too.
Well, remember the book?
So,
I think it was John Naisbitt was his name, Megatrends, and he said one of the biggest trends was high tech but high touch. You needed both. You couldn't go one without the other because you're totally out of balance.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's kind
what
of
my father was about.
Yeah, and you sound like the same thing. What you're talking about.
Also devised, guidance systems for bombs.
Nice.
That's high tech and big touch.
Yeah, right. Talk about touch.
But I love your work that you've done, and the work that you've written about your father, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about what inspired you to write your books. Your most recent one, Riptides, is absolutely beautiful, just incredibly beautiful, and it resonates, I think, with everyone's experiences of loss, but also coming to terms, and then also wondering about what your own mind is doing with perceiving. And I like the way that your poetry has a way of doing that.
Well, thank you. I that means a lot to hear from you. First, I just want to plug a wonderful graphic artist that you turned me to help design this, and I'm going to do this little plug. Let's see, Arlene Hang took a photograph I gave her and did the cover of this, and did such a beautiful job with it. I think she's spectacular. But at any rate, I'd written, well, as you know, I'd done a first book of poems that pretty much came out of both my first wife's death and my father's illness and death, and then this collection overlaps a bit with some of those issues there, but some other things were troubling me, and I suppose if there's a theme that I'm trying to capture in this collection, it's the violence. I don't know how to express the violence life does to us, but not just that life does to us, that we do to each other, that we do to ourselves, and the ways in which it damages and distorts us. And then, for me at least, the way that we try to find some sort of I don't know if you would call it salvation, but some sort of
Maybe redemption?
Healing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, through our interaction with nature in part, but also part of the healing involves confronting those things. Some of the poems I wrote all the way back at the beginning of the Iraq War, or actually going back to 9/11, and then the Iraq War that followed it, and then some were written quite recently about experiences with my mother as she declined, and I saw the violence, if you will, that dementia does to a human identity, and then along the way, there was something that had been nagging at me for, oh my God, dare I say, 60 years. And it was a childhood memory of violence that I participated in. People talk, you know, about, in fact, I was just at a wonderful poetry reading this afternoon. Book called Viral, and by Suzanne. Oh my God, I'm blanking on her last name, which is terrible because I just started to read. But it's about the suicide jump from the George Washington Bridge by the Rutgers student Tyler Clementi,
I remember that.
who was videotaped by his roommate having sex. But it wasn't even full sex with another man.
Right.
Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and so the book that she wrote called Viral really explores the damage that bullying does. And I had to look back at a childhood memory from when I was about 9 years old, and realized that I had participated with another 9-year-old boy in an act of bullying that we directed at a kid who was new to the school. And when you're 9 years old, you maybe don't realize what you're doing. But that thing has stayed with me all these years, and it makes I needed to write about the effect that doing violence has on the perpetrator. And so, at any rate, that's a poem called Tubers that's in the book. So the material in the book spans a range of issues, and I'm trying really to look honestly at some things with my father and his relationship to my mother, some things that I'd done, and I tried to surround the book, or shall I say, frame it with a narrative that came from a family friend that I used to go body surfing with, who was my father's age, a man who, off the coast of Hawaii, was caught in a riptide, hence the title, and was pulled out. He was an excellent body surfer, but he was about 80 years old at that point. He was pulled out into the ocean, and he was there for apparently a couple hours, floating before some boat came along and found him. And he never quite recovered, either physically or emotionally, from that experience. So that becomes, for me, sort of a metaphor that I use to frame the rest of the poems with, about just the damage life does to us. And I don't know. I mean, it was a very different attempt to explore something, deeply troubling in the world than my first book, and at the same time trying to find a path through that to some sort of redemption or healing or whatever you might want to call it. So the book's divided into 6 parts, with the putting myself in the position of my family friend out in the water, and each of those becomes a segment that introduces a set of poems. And the poems go from war to childhood and family violence to the violence that illness and aging does, to ultimately to my house in Vermont and my wife, my current wife, my wife, and to the search for healing. So I don't know if that I probably spoke way too long about that.
Actually, it's fascinating. One of the things you're talking about is really reflection, understanding, trying to find that empathy of what happened. Why did I do this? And
Yes.
and a lot of times there's no answer for it. Life is many times, and when we're young, especially, life happens, and it happens before our governor says, "Stop! What are we doing?" And you may know it's wrong, but you do it anyway. However, a question for you, and you deal with with our youth. I find throughout the years, and I've been teaching martial arts most of my life. So I've been involved for about 50 years with martial arts, and since I was 10, 52 years actually. And I've seen a lot of changes in the type of kids, how they were before and how they are now. And what you were talking about, the reflection, is something that I think we've lost. Where a lot, let's say in a majority of people don't reflect that much. We have victimization, everybody is sorry for themselves, but that's very different from reflecting as to why you're sorry for yourself, or understanding, why am I sorry at all? And I find it fascinating what you're saying, because that, I think, is the path to understanding, to knowledge, to your own self-discovery, and you're sharing that. You're telling the story so somebody else can benefit from it. And this really goes to both of you because you're both teachers. How do we teach our youth who don't seem to be learning it at home and not at school either? How do we teach them to reflect, to read, to get outside of themselves, that this little corner right here where everything's stuck in one little unit? How do we do that?
Well, first, as a teacher, working with college-age students, and I've been doing it for over 30 years, so I guess I've seen, generations or many generations move through. I would say that they haven't all lost it. There are some incredibly wonderful, thoughtful, reflective students, that I end up working with. Of course, I teach literature, so maybe they self-select to some extent. So that's one thing I would say. But still, I do see what you're saying as a more general cultural problem. I'm on Facebook. I have friends on Facebook that are, many of them, almost most of them, are former students going back to the 1980s. And I'm surprised at how little I can find on Facebook, even among good, thoughtful, decent people, how little extended, insightful, questioning conversation, as opposed to people just pumping out positions. And then you end up sort of selecting your own little community of people who agree with you.
Right.
And along the way, you close off the capacity to hear other people, and through that to achieve the sort of reflection you're talking about. So I think something's happened in our. I think it's too easy a straw man to point at technology and say it's because of technology. Right. But nonetheless, there's something that has happened in the way that we communicate with each other as people that has encouraged the unthought out just assertion of self and assertion of positions.
So kind of self-marginalizing.
I'm going to take issue, though. I can't help it.
No, go ahead.
Okay, here's how I see that there's an incredible acceptance for what I would call like the Japanese I novel or confessional writers, or lots of memoirs, and memoirs that really do ask people to introspect. And then there are also a lot of programs where people reflect back on moments that were changing, moments that changed their perceptions. So I kind of see that I agree with you, but I also see hope.
Well, I think there's always hope.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree at all that is out there and it's available.
It might be sort of narcissistic at times, though, so I'm not sure how much empathy there is. I mean, there can be a lot of wallowing, but that can be fun. Well, I like to wallow.
Yeah, the question is whether or not we can listen to other people's wallowing, or whether we just want to express our own.
It doesn't matter, just so I get to say it.
Exactly.
Well, we are.
I will listen to your wallowing anytime.
Yeah,
because I know that it comes from a thoughtful place, but
she doesn't wallow that much. We are at the end of our time, and what I would propose, because Van, I find you very interesting, and I love the things you're saying, and I know Susan respects you very much, and I could see why.
Definitely.
So I'm really glad you came on, and it's making me think about things that were kind of in the back of my mind for a while. We'd love to have you back on and talk a little bit more about this, and kind of explore that human condition a little bit more, and what you see, because I just see a lot of positive in what you're doing. And
Absolutely.
and I was going to ask you if your books are available on Amazon.
They are.
Okay, I will check them out.
Thank you, Texture Press, for
Okay,
all of your support.
sounds great.
Thank you.
Well, Van, we really appreciate you coming on today, and I think seriously, we'd love to have you back on to really get more into this. I think we're touching the surface of things, and we're trying to avoid the sound bites too. And
Sure.
I think you're touching on things that are so basic to the human condition that we don't talk about much anymore. And we should. We really should for a lot of reasons. So, Susan, agree?
I totally agree, and I'm just fascinated too by your description of the riptide and the extended metaphor and the experiences and that sort of reflective self-examination that you allow people to see in yourself, that gives them a chance to figure out how to do it for themselves. I think it's incredibly important. I appreciate it.
And we also know that without self-observation and analysis, you never reach much.
Sure.
So that's very important. There's not a lot of that
thank you.
going on everywhere. So Van, I really appreciate it.
Well,
If
thank
people,
you for letting me participate.
yeah,
This is
and,
a great thing that you folks are doing.
oh, thank you. And can you give us,
Thank you.
just for those interested in the audience, can you tell
Sure.
us about the names of some of the books and where they can be found?
Well, there's Riptide, and then the previous book is Shiva Dancing, Shiva, and sort of a pun on both the Indian god, Hindu god, and the Jewish sitting Shiva
Uh-huh.
in the title, I guess, there. And both actually are available through Amazon
Okay.
and also Texture Press. So
Okay.
if you are able to contact Susan Ash's wonderful press, Texture Press, there's a great listing of books by all kinds of great poets and authors. But Amazon and Texture Press.
Sounds great. And we will put that in the show notes as well so people can go and follow the links. So again, Van, appreciate it. A great pleasure meeting you. And next time we're out there, we'll try to definitely touch base with you and just say hi, if nothing else, have a coffee together or something.
That sounds
I
great.
think it'd
But
be
if
fun.
If you're up in Connecticut.
We are. We're about at least once a year. We're up there. So
Great. And Susan, too. Don't be a stranger. Come this way.
Oh, thank you. Definitely.
on her way to Mars. She's got another goal, so we got to watch how when she gets to
she's
Mars.
going to go to Mars.
She wants to go to Mars.
Well, that'll interrupt your tennis game.
I'm
I don't know.
fascinated by SpaceX.
She really has that kind of bent to go extraterrestrial, so it should be interesting.
I've traveled there
I'm not
before.
surprised.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised at all.
That curiosity.
No,
But anyway.
I mean, the way your mind is, always looking for new experiences and new challenges. That's great.
All
Thank
right.
you. It's supposedly feasible now.
We probably can.
Oh, yeah.
It's
I
sort of
I
going
haven't seen the
away.
movie yet, but The Martian, but yeah. Well, good luck with that. I'll probably stay on Earth. Okay,
Yep.
so
Yep. Well, if you're watching the show on YouTube, please subscribe and give us your feedback. We'll also have a way for you to contact Van on the show notes. So thanks a lot again, Van. Susan, as always. I guess we won't see you next week. We'll see you the week after.
That's right.
And we will be back. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ben.
night.
Great job.
Thanks.